And let's move on to our next talk, which is by one of our students at OU, James DerKacy. He will tell us about a supernova 2211 FXY. Is James there?
Yeah, I'm here, Mook.
All right, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mook. So once again, my name is James DerKacy, and today I'm going to talk about some work that we've been doing this summer on supernova 2021 FXY, and in particular, I'm going to highlight its relationship to what we've taken to calling here its cousin supernova 2017 ERP. But before I jump into those comparisons, I want to briefly talk about the project that we are a part of that we use to get this data because it's new. And so this is what's known as the APOSS collaboration. So our acronym is not quite as forced as some of the other astronomy acronyms that people use. It stands for Precision Observations of Infant Supernova Explosions. And this collaboration basically has grown out of the Carnegie Supernova Project 1 and 2, but this time with the goal to obtain high precision, rapid cadence, multi-wavelength observations of supernova of all types shortly after explosion. And so the way that we ensure that we're catching these supernova right after explosion is that we strictly limit the targets that we follow up to objects that have deep being roughly 20th magnitude non-detections within 48 hours prior to their discovery as a supernova. As far as where we're getting these objects from, they primarily come from ZTF and ATLAS. And the reason why we want to look at the supernova, right after explosion is that the early time photometry and spectroscopy probe the progenitor system, the nearby environment around the supernova, and the explosion mechanics in all of these supernova types. So as far as a little more details on what specifically we're looking for in each type of supernova, I've sort of listed them out here on the bottom of the slide. But again, just to sort of emphasize our main point is to catch these early and get really good quality photometry and spectroscopy. Where APO sort of falls into this is that we've been using DIS and Cosmos to help get where we can some early spectroscopy, but mainly continuing to follow these objects as they evolve so that we can connect these early properties back to the sets of properties that we've already studied really well from the past 40 or 50 years of studying supernova. So transitioning now into the object that we're specifically focusing on, which is 2021 FXY. This object was discovered the night of March 17th by a semi-professional astronomer in Japan with a last non-detection of roughly 3 days prior. The reason this object made it into our follow-up queue is actually because some of our collaborators in Assassin had a more constraining last non-detection of about 2 days. And so we were able to jump on this the very next night and get multiple photometry points that next night. Another sort of interesting thing about this object is that its host is NGC 5018. It's a relatively nearby galaxy, redshift of approximately 0.0094. But this galaxy has also hosted 2 previous Type 1a supernova in the past 20 years, supernova 2002 DJ and supernova 2017 ISQ. So the fact that this is the third 1A to have gone off in this galaxy in 20 years is pretty interesting on its own, and something that is a topic that we're going to cover in our paper on this object eventually. But the fact that 3 supernovae have gone off in this galaxy isn't, again, why we're interested in this object. We're really interested in this object because it appears to be a less reddened version of supernova 2017 ERP with a couple of unexpected differences. And just to sort of highlight what these similarities and differences are, here I'm showing you the light curves that we have in 5 bands. So we have B and V up here on the top, as well as G, R, and I. And as you can see, the light curves of these objects are, for the most part, pretty similar. There's some small variations within them. But at least within the supernova community, the way that we tend to classify how similar the light curves of these objects are is by measuring a light curve shape parameter. And when we go and measure that shape parameter, we find that for both of these objects, their shape parameters are basically the same. They're well within the 1 sigma errors. And we figure that most of what we're seeing in terms of the variation between these objects and these light curves here is in some part due to reddening, but also the fact that we have slight filter differences. So our main telescope that we use for the photometric follow-up is the SWOPE telescope at Las Campanas. And so the filters there are just slightly different than some of the other filters that are commonly used to follow objects like 17 ERP. But it's not just the photometry that's similar between these two objects, it's the spectra as well. And in particular, what really drives our want to study these is the fact that we have HST STIS spectroscopy into the UV of these objects. And so what I've shown here in this plot is 21 FXY in blue. This spectra is taken at maximum light. And we have 2 spectra from 17 ERP in orange and red, sandwiched around maximum light. And I've also included the UV spectra of 2011 FE at maximum light. And the reason why I've included 2011 FE in this plot is because 2011 FE is sort of our plain vanilla, top of the bell curve average type 1A supernova. And while in the parts of the STIS spectra that we have that trail back into the optical, we see that outside of a few flux differences, the spectral features of these objects in terms of their shapes and profiles and depths and velocities are very similar. When we come into the ultraviolet, they're very, very different. And so the question ultimately becomes, what is causing the difference between these relatively normal objects, that are all very similar in the optical, but wildly different in the UV. And so we've been working on the UV here for quite a while, and spectral formation is quite complicated. But one thing that can sort of help us to understand these differences is the fact that a lot of the spectral features are blue shifted in 17 ERP and 21 FXY. And so this may be something as simple as just an opacity effect that because there's a lot of line blanketing from metals in the ultraviolet, they're depressing the flux, but this also at the same time is pushing these features out farther because the opacity is increasing from these metal elements, and so the photosphere is moving farther out into the ejecta. So sort of taking a deeper look at the optical spectra now, we again see that there are some flux differences here in the UV between 21 FXY and 17 ERP. So this 21 FXY spectra was one that we took here at APO using DIS. But outside of these flux differences, it is again really striking that for the most part, again, the line profiles, their relative depths, their shapes are all very, very similar. And so we think that at least part of what's making these objects look so similar is the fact that there's very strong reddening in the host galaxy of 2017 ERP, which you can see here by the very strong sodium 1 line that we don't see in 21 FXY. So we need to do a detailed reddening analysis to sort of figure out exactly how much that's impacting these objects. We don't think it's causing all of the similarities and differences, but figuring out exactly how much is going to let us do some further studies to really figure out why these objects look so similar outside of this silicon 2 feature here, which is really the only feature that is different between the two. And so the reason why it's important that this feature is different is because this silicon 2 feature is our main diagnostic feature within type 1A supernova. And if we look deeper into that silicon 2 feature, we can classify subtypes of type 1A supernova using that feature in what's called the branch diagram here. And so this plots the pseudo-equivalent width of the 6355 line from silicon 2 against the 5972 line. And what we find when we plot these here is that there are 4 different subgroups. These have actually been verified as very robust groups by another OU grad student, Anthony Burrow. But what we see is that when we categorize them within these groups, this red star here, which falls within what's called the core normal group, which is, our plain vanilla average type 1As, is not where we find 21FXY. 21FXY is this green star over here. And so the fact that these supernova look so similar but exist in different groups is very interesting and can lead us to better understanding what causes the diversity, because not only are these groups on this branch diagram statistically robust, we also think that these different groupings have actual physical meaning for type 1A supernova. So for example, these purple squares up here in what's known as the cool group, these type 1A supernova tend to be underluminous. They tend to decline much faster than our average supernova, whereas these green triangles over here, which are the so-called shallow silicons, they tend to be more luminous than average. And they also tend to show more doubly ionized features in their spectra compared to some of the other groups. So to really start probing at what these differences are, one thing that we've been doing is synthetic spectral modeling with SINO. And so this is work that one of our RAU undergraduate students, Sarah Paw, has been working on this summer, is trying to simulate these spectra here and use SINO to get some estimates of the physical parameters. So some of the main parameters that we can draw out from these spectra are the line velocities, estimates of the density profiles, but we can also use them, for example, to look for high velocity features, which will appear, for example, in the calcium near infrared triplet over here, at velocities that are higher than where we estimate the photosphere within the supernova to be. And so really using these synthetic spectra to nail down some of the details, 21FXY and 17ERP is going to help us to understand why these objects look so similar, but also have different subclassifications at the same time. So just to wrap up here, POISE is a new collaboration that we're a part of, and we're using some of our APO time to probe the earliest moments of supernova explosions. Supernova 2021 FXY and 17ERP are similar objects, but they have some unexpected differences that we want to figure out why they have. To do that, we need to finalize some of our SINO fits to understand the substructure of features, as well as do a detailed reddening analysis to understand how much of the differences we're seeing are just caused by the host galaxies as opposed to being intrinsic differences. And so while Mook is looking for questions there, I just want to briefly thank all of the collaborators that have helped make this work possible, as well as give a special shout out to Mook, as well as Candace Russett, and the entire OU Observatory Methods class. So the spectra of 2021 FXY that I've been showing here today, they took during their training trip in April. So training trips can be very useful scientifically as well.
Yeah, that was very exciting for our students as well. Thanks, James, for the excellent talk. Any questions? I'll ask a question in the meantime. So you mentioned that this galaxy has 3 type 1A supernova in about 20 years. I suppose that's very unusual, but is it? I mean, it should happen sometimes, right? It should happen in a galaxy.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not uncommon to find multiple supernova within the galaxy in a short period of time. I forget the NGC name of it, but there's one galaxy that's known as the Fireworks Galaxy that's had like 10 or 12 observed supernova, since we've been able to observe them. As far as this one goes, it's not that out of the normal that they're all 1As, because it's an early type galaxy, so there shouldn't be any young stars in it. But at least for this galaxy, it's very interesting that we see so many supernova, because it's not believed to be sort of a standard early type galaxy. The galaxy, people think that this is an elliptical that's formed from the result of a recent merger, and there also seems to be a stellar bridge to another nearby galaxy in the group. So the galaxy itself is very sort of interesting, and maybe not standard for early type galaxies that we would expect to see 1As in.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. If not, let's thanks James again. And our next speaker